Hi, welcome to this exam lab walkthrough video. The goal of this exercise is to create a non-default VPC using the VPC wizard. This exercise will help you explore how to configure the basic components of a VPC like public and private subnets, NAT gateways, elastic IPs, and assigning DNS hostnames for EC2 instances in the VPC. So without further ado, let's quickly review the scenario for this exam lab. You will create a non-default VPC with a public and private subnet located in US West 1 using the VPC wizard. Each subnet is assigned to a specific CIDR block in different availability zones. You have to ensure that a NAT gateway is in place to allow private resources to access the internet without exposing those resources to incoming internet connections. Lastly, you need to ensure that all the EC2 instances that will be provisioned in the VPC will be automatically associated with a DNS hostname. General instruction: always use the default settings when implementing the instructions on the AWS Management Console unless stated otherwise. Just a quick reminder, it's best to start by reading all of the instructions first before implementing anything on the AWS Management Console. This will help you get the gist of the configurations that you will perform and which part you will be switching pages to provision and configure another AWS service. So let's browse through the instructions. First, create a non-default VPC located in US West 1 that is configured to host resources with a CIDR block of 10.0.0.0/16 and name it TD VPC Lab. Second, create a public subnet called TD Public Subnet in US West 1A and assign the 10.0.0.0/24 CIDR block. Then, create a private subnet called TD Private Subnet in US West 1B and assign the 10.0.1.0/24 CIDR block. Then, create a NAT gateway and assign an elastic IP address. Lastly, ensure that all EC2 instances launched in the TD VPC lab will always be associated with a DNS hostname. There are a lot of ways to perform the instructions. You can either manually provision all the resources that need to be configured, or you can use the VPC launch wizard for this exercise. The VPC launch wizard allows you to create a VPC with a public subnet and a private subnet with a NAT instance. So for this exercise, we will utilize the VPC launch wizard. But wait, you can stop at this point and try the lab exercise by yourself. Once you are done performing the exercise in your environment, you can continue watching the second half of this video to verify your work. Else, you can also proceed with the walkthrough video we created to guide you in performing this lab exercise. Let's review instruction number 1, which states, create a non-default VPC located in US West 1 that is configured to host resources with a CIDR block of 10.0.0.0/16 and name it TD VPC Lab. First, navigate to the VPC dashboard and click the Launch VPC Wizard button. Since you need to create a public subnet and a private subnet with a NAT instance for the VPC, select the VPC with public subnet and private subnets configuration. You can always read the details about the VPC you want to set up prior to selecting one, so take a quick read if you want to confirm the action on this step. Then, configure the CIDR block to the VPC to 10.0.0.0/16 and enter the VPC name TD VPC Lab. Then, let's work on instruction number 2 that says, create a public subnet called TD Public Subnet in US West 1A and assign the 10.0.0.0/24 CIDR block. Then, create a private subnet called TD Private Subnet in US West 1B and assign the 10.0.1.0/24 CIDR block. Here, we have to assign CIDR ranges to the two subnets. Make sure to correctly provide the correct information here. Configure the public subnet to use the 10.0.0.0/24 CIDR block. And then, define US West 1A as the availability zone and set the subnet name to TD public subnet. Enter the 10.0.1.0/24 CIDR block for the private subnet and select US West 1B as the availability zone. Set the subnet name to TD private subnet. Next instruction states, create a NAT gateway and assign an elastic IP address. Here, we will be asked to associate an elastic IP, but we don't have one. So, to provision an elastic IP for the NAT gateway, go to VPC dashboard and click Elastic IPs. Make sure that you open the page in a new tab since you will continue setting up the VPC after this step. Click Allocate Elastic IP Address. Then click Allocate. Associate the EIP allocation ID to the NAT gateway in the VPC launch wizard. Once that's done, you are ready to proceed to the last step. A fourth instruction states that you have to ensure that all EC2 instances launched in the TD VPC lab will always be associated with a DNS hostname. This setting can be configured also through the VPC launch wizard. After allocating an EIP for the NAT gateway, you will also be asked to enable DNS hostnames. The Enable DNS hostname settings help you ensure that all instances provisioned in the VPC will automatically have a DNS hostname by default. To do this, just activate the Enable DNS hostname settings in the VPC wizard by selecting Yes. Once done, you're ready to set up your VPC. Click Create VPC. Then, the model will show the progress of creating the VPC. This may take some time since there are multiple resources that are being provisioned for you. Once done, you can view the newly created VPC and review all the configurations in the VPC dashboard. And as a last reminder, before you end an exam lab and proceed to the next one, try to go through all the instructions once again and check if you missed any step. If you figure out that you might have missed a step or you are not sure if you did the instructions correctly, you can always verify your work by reviewing the configurations on the AWS Management Console again. And that's it. Thanks for joining me in this walkthrough.
If you want to learn more on how to book and take your AWS certification exam online or other AWS services, head on to our library of AWS cheat sheets on the Tutorials Dojo website. You can find the link in the description section below.
And if you're preparing for your AWS exams, we recommend that you work on practice exams to increase your chances of passing the real test. Tutorials Dojo is well regarded to have the best AWS practice exams in the market. Visit the Tutorials Dojo Portal to see our list of AWS practice test courses and reviewers. Once again, you can find the link in the description section below. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to click the subscribe button and click on the bell icon so you'll get notified whenever we release new YouTube videos. See ya!